Hello, fanatics. Thank you so much for joining me on my true crime Storytime premiere. For those of you who don't know, a premiere is a pre-recorded video where I join you in the comment section. So you can chat to me, you can ask questions, and I will do my best to answer them. I can't justify the behaviours of said perpetrator, but if you are watching on replay, a big hello to you. Please do use that comment section. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. I will be doing Thursday true crime premieres moving forward. It was something we all chatted about in my Monday Night Live. But yeah, thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate that. You take time out of your day to join me. Now, today we are talking about someone who is very, very vile. It is graphic. It gets graphic. He's just one very, very sick individual. You seem to like the very sick individuals, so here's how we're going to kickstart our true crime Thursday premieres. Please do grab whatever you are working on. Come join me. Let me know what you're working on. I'd love to know these things. And yeah, grab a drink. Please don't be eating. That's why I do it for 8 o'clock. Hopefully you've all had dinner and everything else, because I never know who I'm going to be talking about. Atlanta and Sharon have made a couple of suggestions, so I have those coming up very, very soon for you. Thank you. If you do have suggestions, leave it in the comments or let me know. Either way, and I will research these people and bring them to life. Now, I'm not a typical... When I watch true crime, either on YouTube or on TV or anything like that, they just give you the facts. This person did this, this person did that. I don't. I throw my comments, I throw my sarcasm in. That's how I roll. So, yeah, let's get to it. Today, we are talking about Albert Fish. Apologies, I am working on my custom. I like to tell you what kit I'm working on, but it's a custom, a memorial piece for a very dear friend of mine. Okay, are we ready? Oh dear. Albert Fish was born in Washington, D.C. on May the 19th in 1870 to Randall and Ellen. Albert's father was American of English ancestry and his mother was Scots-Irish American. His father was 43 years older than his mother, aged 75 at the time of his birth. Albert was the youngest of 3 living siblings, Walter, Annie and Edwin. He wished to be known as Albert, after a deceased sibling, and to escape his nickname, Ham and Eggs, that he was given at an orphanage in which he spent most of his childhood. Albert's family had a history of mental illness. His uncle had mania. One of his brothers was confined in a state mental hospital, and his sister Annie was diagnosed with a, quote, mental affliction. 3 other relatives were diagnosed with mental illnesses, and his mother had oral and or visual hallucinations. Albert's father, a fertilizer manufacturer, suffered a fatal heart attack at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad station in 1875. A quick side note here. He was 75 years old when his youngest child was born. This isn't going to go very well. A lot of mental illnesses surrounding the family. I think in modern day, mental health is a lot more acceptable. We have more awareness around it and a lot more support and all of that, but we're going back into the 1800s here, and if you know me at all and you watch my true crime, I can't speak words. I'm not very good at pronunciations. I'm not very good names of places, names of people, and hard words, so please do bear with me. I hope I'm doing it justice. Okay, back to it. The cemetery records show that he died on October the 16th and was buried on October the 19th in grave R96/89. Albert's mother then put her son into St. John's Orphanage in Washington, where he was frequently physically abused. Albert began to enjoy the physical pain that the beatings brought. Again, not boding very well here. In 1880, Albert's mother secured a government job and was able to remove Albert from the orphanage. In 1882, at the age of 12, side note, a year younger than Reese, he began a relationship with a telegraph boy. The youth introduced Albert to such practices as drinking urine and eating poo-poo. I'm glad to say Reese doesn't have such friends. Albert began visiting public baths where he could watch other boys undress, spending a great portion of his weekends on these visits. Throughout his life, he would write obscene letters to women whose names he acquired from classified ads and matrimonial agencies. By 1890, at the age of 20, Albert moved to New York City, where he engaged in male prostitution and began molesting and raping boys, mostly younger than 6 years old. In 1898, Albert's mother arranged a marriage for him with Anna Mary Hoffman, who was 9 years his junior. They had 6 children: Albert, Anna, Gertrude, Eugene, John, and Henry. In 1903, Albert was arrested for grand larceny, convicted, and incarcerated in Sing Sing. Now, for any true crime fanatic out there, Sing Sing is the one place you don't want to end up. But I have a horrible feeling that Albert probably didn't think the same way. But okay. Albert later recounted an incident in which a male lover took him to a wax museum, where he was fascinated by a bisection of a human penis and subsequently became obsessed with sexual mutilation. Several years later, around 1910, Albert was working in Wilmington in Delaware when he met a 19-year-old man named Thomas Kedden. He took Thomas to where he was staying, and the two began a sadomasochistic relationship. It's unclear whether or not Albert forced Thomas to do these things, but in his confession it implies that Thomas was intellectually disabled. After 10 days, just 10, Albert took Thomas to, quote, an old farmhouse where he tortured him for a period of 2 weeks. Albert eventually tied Thomas up, cutting off half of his penis. Quote, I shall never forget his scream or the look he gave me, end quote. He originally intended to kill Thomas, cut up his body and take it home, but he feared the hot weather would draw attention to him. So, instead, Albert poured peroxide over the wound, wrapped it in a Vaseline-covered handkerchief, left a $10 bill, kissed Thomas goodbye, and left. Quote, took the first train I could get back home. Never heard what became of him or tried to find out, end quote. In January 1917, Albert's wife left him for John. He was a handyman who lived with the Fish family. Albert then had to raise his children as a single parent. After his arrest, Albert told a newspaper that when his wife left him, she took nearly every possession the family owned, except the children, by accounts. Albert began to have auditory hallucinations. He once wrapped himself in a carpet, saying that he was following the instructions of John the Apostle. It was about this time that Albert began to indulge in self-harm by embedding needles into his groin and abdomen. After his arrest, X-rays revealed that Albert had at least 29 needles lodged in his pelvic region. He also hit himself repeatedly with a nail-studded paddle and inserted wool doused with lighter fluid into his anus and set it alight. While Albert was never thought to have physically attacked or abused his children, he did encourage them and their friends to paddle his buttocks with the same nail-studded paddle he used to abuse himself. And if you think this is bad, we're about to talk about his escalation. Around 1919, Albert stabbed an intellectually disabled boy in Georgetown. He chose people who were either mentally disabled or African American as his victims, later explaining that he assumed these people would not be missed when killed. Side note, if I'm a mother of an intellectually disabled, as they keep referring to them here, you would keep closer tabs on your child, in my opinion. And I'm not even getting into the racism of that logic. So, yeah. Albert would later claim to have occasionally paid boys to procure other children for him. Albert tortured, mutilated and murdered young children with his, quote, implements of hell, end quote. These were a meat cleaver, a butcher knife and a small handsaw. On July the 11th in 1924, Albert found 8-year-old Beatrice Keel playing alone on her parents' farm in Staten Island in New York. He offered her money to come and help him look for rhubarb. She was about to leave the farm when her mother chased Albert away. Fish left, but returned later to their barn, where he tried to sleep but was discovered by Beatrice's father and forced to leave. 3 days later, Albert killed Frances McDonnell, also on Staten Island. During 1924, 54-year-old Albert Fish, suffering from psychosis, felt that God was commanding him to torture and sexually mutilate children. Shortly before his abduction of Grace Budd, Albert attempted to test his implements of hell on a child he had been molesting named Cyril Quinn. Cyril and his friend were playing box ball on a sidewalk when Albert asked them if they had eaten lunch. When they said that they had not, he invited them into his apartment for sandwiches. While the two boys were wrestling on Albert's bed, they dislodged his mattress. Underneath was a knife and a small handsaw and a meat cleaver. They became frightened and ran out of that apartment. Despite already being married, Albert married Estella Wilcox on February the 6th in 1930 in Waterloo, New York. They divorced after only 1 week. Albert was arrested in May 1930 for, quote, sending an obscene letter to a woman who answered an ad for a maid, end quote. Following that arrest and another in 1931, he was sent to the Bellevue Hospital for observation. On May the 25th in 1928, Albert saw a classified ad in the Sunday edition of the New York World that read, quote, young man, 18, wishes position in country. Edward Budd, 406 West 15th Street, end quote. On May the 28th, Albert, then 58 years old, visited the Budd family in Manhattan under the pretense of hiring Edward. He later confessed that he planned to tie Edward up, mutilate him, and leave him to bleed to death. Albert introduced himself as Frank Howard, a farmer from Farmingdale. He promised to hire Budd and his friend Willie, and he said he would send for them in a few days. Albert failed to show up, but he sent a telegram to the Budd family apologising and set a later date. When Albert returned, he met Edward's younger sister, 10-year-old Grace Budd. He apparently shifted his amorous intentions towards Grace and quickly made up a story about having to attend his niece's birthday party. He convinced the parents, Delia Flanagan and Albert Budd, to let Grace accompany him to the party that evening. Albert subsequently took Grace to an abandoned house he had previously picked out to use for the murder of his next victim. Quote, Wisteria Cottage at 359 Mountain Road, located in the East Irvington neighborhood of New York. There he murdered and ate the girl. The police arrested 66-year-old Superintendent Charles Edward Pope on September the 5th in 1930 as a suspect in Grace's disappearance, accused by his estranged wife. He spent 108 days in jail between his arrest and his trial on December the 22nd. He was found not guilty. In November 1934, an anonymous letter was sent to Grace's parents, which ultimately led the police to Albert. Mrs. Budd was illiterate and could not read the letter herself, so she had her son read it to her. The unaltered letter reads, My dear Mrs. Budd, in 1894, a friend of mine shipped as a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco to Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and 2 others went ashore and got drunk. When they returned, the boat was gone. At the time, there was a famine in China. Meat of any kind was from $1 to $3 a pound. So great was the suffering among the very poor that all children under 12 were sold to the butchers to be cut up and sold for food in order to keep others from starving. A boy or girl under 14 was not safe in the street. You could go in any shop and ask for steak or chops or stew meat. A part of the naked body of a boy or girl would be brought out and just what you wanted cut from it. A boy or girl's behind, which is the sweetest part of the body and sold as veal cutlet, brought the highest price. John stayed there so long he acquired a taste for human flesh. On his return to New York, he stole 2 boys, one 7, one 11, took them to his home, stripped them naked, tied them in a closet, then burned everything they had on. Several times every day and night he spanked them, tortured them, to make their meat good and tender. First he killed the 11-year-old boy, because he had the fattest bottom and, of course, the most meat on it. Every part of his body was cooked and eaten except the head, bones and guts. He was roasted in the oven, boiled, broiled, fried and stewed. The little boy was next, went the same way. At the time, I was living at 409 E 100 Street. He told me so often how good human flesh was, I made up my mind to taste it. On Sunday, June the 3rd, I called on you and brought you pot cheese, strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her. On the pretense of taking her to a party, you said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all of my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her, then hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run downstairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. First, I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat to my room, cook and eat it. How sweet and tender her bottom was, roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not sleep with her though. I could have had. I wished. She died a virgin. Police investigated the letter. The story concerning Captain Davis and the famine in Hong Kong could not be verified. The part of the letter concerning the murder of Grace, however, was found to be accurate in its description and of the kidnapping and subsequent events, although it was impossible to confirm whether or not Albert had actually eaten part of Grace's body. The letter was delivered in an envelope that had a small hexagon emblem with the letters NYPCBA, representing New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. A janitor at the company told police that he had taken some of the stationery home but left it at his rooming house at 200 East 52nd Street when he moved out. The landlady of the rooming house said that Albert checked out of that room a few days earlier. She said that Albert's son sent him money and he asked her to hold on to his next check for him. William King, the chief investigator for the case, waited outside the room until Albert returned. He agreed to go to the headquarters for questioning, then brandishing a razor blade. King disarmed Albert and took him to the police headquarters. Albert made no attempt to deny the murder of Grace Budd, saying that he meant to go to the house to kill her brother Edward. Fish said, quote, "Never entered my head," end quote, to rape the girl, but he later claimed to his attorney that while kneeling on Grace's chest and strangling her, he did have 2 involuntary ejaculations. This information was used at trial to make the claim that the kidnapping was sexually motivated, therefore avoiding any mention of cannibalism. During the night of July the 14th in 1924, 9-year-old Francis MacDonald was reported missing after he failed to return home after playing catch with friends in Port Richmond, Staten Island. A search was organised and his body was found hanging by a tree in a wooded area near his home. He had been sexually assaulted and then strangled with his suspenders. According to an autopsy, Francis had also suffered extensive lacerations to his legs and abdomen, and his left hamstring had almost entirely been stripped of its flesh. Albert refused to claim responsibility for this, although he later stated that he had intended to castrate the boy but fled when he heard someone approaching in the area. Francis's friends told the police that he was taken by an elderly man with a grey moustache. A neighbour also told the police that he observed the boy with a similar-looking man walking along a grassy path into the nearby woods. Francis's mother, Anna, said she saw the same man earlier that day, telling reporters, quote, "He came shuffling down the street, mumbling to himself and making queer motions with his hands. I saw his thick grey hair and his drooping grey moustache. Everything about him seemed faded and grey." End quote. This description resulted in the mysterious stranger becoming known as, quote, the Grey Man. Francis MacDonald's murder remained unsolved until the murder of Grace Budd. When several eyewitnesses, among them the Staten Island farmer Hans Keel, positively identified Albert Fish as the odd stranger seen around Port Richmond on the day of Francis's disappearance. Richmond County District Attorney Thomas Walsh announced his intention to seek an indictment against Albert Fish for the boy's murder. At first, Albert denied the charges. It was only in March 1935, after the conclusion of his trial for Grace's murder and his confession to the killing of Billy Gaffney, that he confirmed to investigators that he had also raped and murdered Francis. When the MacDonald confession was made public, the New York Daily Mirror wrote that the disclosure solidified Albert's reputation as, quote, the most vicious child slayer in criminal history. End quote. On February the 11th in 1927, 3-year-old Billy Beaton and his 12-year-old brother were playing in the apartment hallway in Brooklyn with 4-year-old Billy Gaffney. When the 12-year-old left for his apartment, both younger boys disappeared. Beaton was later found on the roof of the apartments. When asked what happened to Gaffney, Beaton said, quote, the boogeyman took him, end quote. Gaffney's body was never recovered. Initially, serial killer Peter Kodzinowski was suspected in Gaffney's murder. Then Joseph Meehan, a motorman on a Brooklyn trolley, saw a picture of Albert Fish in a newspaper and identified him as the old man whom he saw on February the 11th in 1927. The old man had been trying to quiet a little boy sitting with him on the trolley. The boy was not wearing a jacket and was crying for his mother, and was dragged by the man on and off the trolley. Beaton's description of the bogeyman matched Albert Fish. Police matched the description of the child to Billy Gaffney. Detectives of the Manhattan Missing Persons Bureau were able to establish that Albert was employed as a house painter by a Brooklyn real estate company during February 1927, and on that day of Billy Gaffney's disappearance, he was working at a location a few miles from where the boy was abducted. Albert claimed the following in a letter to his attorney. I brought him to the Riker Avenue dumps. There is a house that stands alone not far from where I took him. I took the G-boy there, stripped him naked and tied his hands and feet and gagged him with a dirty piece of rag I picked out of the dump. Then I burned his clothes, threw his shoes in the dump. When I walked back and took trolley to 59th Street at 2 a.m. and walked home from there. Next day, about 2 p.m, I took tools, a good heavy cat of nine tails, homemade, short handle, cut one of my belts in half, slit these half in 6 strips about 8 inches long. I whipped his bare behind till the blood ran from his legs. I cut off his ears, nose, slit his mouth from ear to ear, gouged out his eyes. He was dead then. I stuck the knife in his belly and held my mouth to his body and drank his blood. I picked up 4 old potato sacks and gathered a pile of stones. Then I cut him up. I had a grip with me. I put his nose, ears and a few slices of his belly in the grip. Then I cut him through the middle of his body, just below his belly button, then through his legs about 2 inches below his behind. I put this in my grip with a lot of paper. I cut off his head, feet, arms, hands, and the legs below the knee. This I put in sacks weighed with stones, tied the ends and threw them into the pools of slimy water you will see all along the road going to North Beach. Water is 3 to 4 foot deep. They sank at once. I came home with my meat. I had the front of his body I liked best. His monkey and peewees and a nice little fat behind to roast in the oven and eat. I made a stew out of his ears, nose, pieces of his face and belly. I put onions, carrots, turnips, celery, salt and pepper. It was good. Then I slit the cheeks of his behind open to cut his monkey and peewees and washed them first. I put strips of bacon on each cheek of his behind and put in the oven. Then I picked 4 onions, and when the meat had roasted about a quarter of an hour, I poured about a pint of water over it for gravy and put in the onions. At frequent intervals, I basted his behind with a wooden spoon so the meat would be nice and juicy. In about 2 hours, it was nice and brown, cooked through. I never ate any roast turkey that tasted half as good as his sweet, fat little behind. I ate every bit of the meat in about 4 days. His little monkey was as sweet as a nut, but his peewees I could not chew, threw them in the toilet. Billy Gaffney's mother, Elizabeth, visited Albert Fish in Sing Sing, accompanied by Detective King and 2 other men. She wanted to ask him about her son's death, but Albert refused to speak to her. Albert began to weep and asked to be left alone. After 2 hours of asking him questions through his lawyer, James Dempsey, Mrs. Gaffney gave up. She was still unconvinced that Albert was her son's killer. Albert's trial for the murder of Grace Budd began on March 11th in 1935 in White Plains, New York. Frederick Close and Westchester County Chief Assistant District Attorney Albert Gallagher was prosecuting attorney. Albert's defense counsel was James Dempsey, a former prosecutor and the one-time mayor of Peekskill, New York. The trial lasted for 10 days. Albert pleaded insanity and claimed to have heard voices from God telling him to kill children. Several psychiatrists testified about Albert's sexual fetishes, which included sadism, cannibalism, paedophilia, necrophilia, and infibulation. Dempsey, in his summation, noted that Albert was, quote, a psychiatric phenomenon, end quote, and that nowhere in legal or medical records was there another individual who possessed so many sexual abnormalities. The defense chief expert witness was Frederick Wortham, a psychiatrist with an emphasis on child development, who conducted psychiatric examinations for the New York criminal courts. During 2 days of testimony, Frederick explained Albert's obsession with religion and specifically his preoccupation with the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac. Wortham said that Albert believed that sacrificing a boy would be penance for his own sins, and that even if the act itself was wrong, angels would prevent it if God did not approve. Albert attempted the sacrifice once before, but was thwarted when a car drove past. Edward Budd was the next intended victim, but he turned out to be larger than expected, so he settled on Grace. Although he knew Grace was female, it is believed that Albert perceived her as a boy. Wortham then detailed Albert's cannibalism, which in his mind he associated with communion. The last question Dempsey asked Wortham was a 15,000-word-long detailed Albert's life, and ended with asking how the doctor considered his mental condition based on his life. He simply answered, "He is insane." Gallagher cross-examined Wortham on whether Albert knew the difference between right and wrong. He responded that he did know, but that it was a perverted knowledge based on his opinions of sin, atonement, and religion. and therefore was, quote, insane knowledge. The defence called 2 more psychiatrists to support Wortham's findings. The first of 4 rebuttal witnesses was Minas Gregory, the former manager of the Bellevue Hospital where Albert was treated during 1930. He testified that Albert was abnormal but sane. Under cross-examination, Dempsey asked if paedophilia indicated a sane or insane person. Gregory replied that such a person was not, quote, mentally sick, end quote, and that these were common perversions that were, quote, socially perfectly all right, end quote, and that Albert was, quote, no different from millions of other people, end quote. Some very prominent and successful who had the very same perversions. The next witness was the resident physician at the Tombs. Dempsey objected to a doctor with no training in psychiatry testifying on the issue of sanity, but Justice Close overruled on the basis that the jury could decide what weight to give a prison doctor. When asked whether Albert's causing himself pain indicated a mental condition, he replied, quote, he was only, quote, punishing himself to get sexual gratification, end quote. The next witness, Charles Lambert, testified that coprophilia was a common practice and that religious cannibalism may be psychopathic but, quote, was a matter of taste, oh my goodness, end quote, and not evidence of a psychosis. The last witness repeated Lambert's opinion. Another defence witness was Mary Nichols, Albert's 17-year-old stepdaughter. She described how Albert taught her and her brothers and sisters several games involving overtones of child molestation. None of the jurors doubted that Albert was insane, but ultimately, as one later explained, they felt he should be executed anyway. They found him to be sane and guilty, and the judge sentenced the defendant to death by electrocution. Albert arrived at prison in March 1935 and was executed on January the 16th in 1936 in the electric chair at Sing Sing. He entered the chamber at 11:06 p.m. and was pronounced dead 3 minutes later. He was buried in the Sing Sing prison cemetery. Albert is said to have helped the executioner position the electrodes on his body. His last words were reportedly, quote, I don't even know why I'm here, end quote. According to one witness present, it took 2 jolts before Albert died, creating the rumour that the apparatus was short-circuited by the needles that Fish inserted into his body. These rumours were later regarded as untrue, as Albert reportedly died in the same fashion and time frame as others in the electric chair. At a meeting with reporters after the execution, Albert's lawyer, James Dempsey, revealed that he was in possession of the client's, quote, final statement. This amounted to several pages of handwritten notes that Albert apparently penned in the hours prior to his death. When pressed by the assembled journalists to reveal the documents' contents, Dempsey refused, stating, quote, "I will never show it to anyone. It was the most filthy string of obscenities I have ever read." And there is the one almighty disgusting true crime story of Albert Fish. I'm not going to lie, I actually feel queasy. Are you all okay? This is one way to kick off my true crime Storytime premiere Thursdays. I don't even know where to begin. It was actually Carl that brought this name to me, and I don't think he realised how horrific and truly disgusting Albert Fish was. He was known to have killed Francis MacDonald, who was 8, Billy Gaffney, who was 4, Grace Budd, who was 10, but he's also suspected of killing Emma Richardson, aged 5, in October of 1926, Yetta Abraham Owitz, aged 12, in 1927, Robin Jane Lew, aged 6, on May the 2nd, 1931, Mary Ellen O'Connor, aged 16, on the 15th of February 1932, and Benjamin Collins, aged 17, on December the 15th in 1932. I genuinely believe there are probably more and more victims out there. I'm just appalled. This is one disgusting, unspeakable human being. He was a suspect in at least 5 murders in his lifetime. He confessed to 3 that police were able to trace to a known homicide. He confessed to stabbing at least 2 other people. Fish once boasted that he had, quote, "children in every state," end quote, and at one time stated his number of victims was about 100. However, it's not known whether he was referring to rapes or cannibalisation, nor is it known if it is even true. He was 65 years old when he was executed. Now, if we go back way to his childhood, we know he was heading towards, shall we say, a serial killer at the very least, mainly of children, because he was going to the pools where he was watching them undress. It was heading that way. We kind of knew, as true crime fanatics, we kind of pick up on red flags, shall we say. But to go as far as he did, and when he sat in that chair and said, "I don't even know why I'm here," I call BS on that. I believe he honestly knew. I find the insane tact a little annoying, because everyone will try their luck at the insanity plea. But, I mean, this is one very disturbed individual. Doesn't any murderer on this scale have to be a little insane? Because a sane person would not follow through with it, or seek help in therapy at the very least. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, let me know your thoughts. Obviously, my premiere guests will be talking to me as we are doing this, but if you are on replay, please do let me know your thoughts. I don't feel good. Absolutely disgusting, vile, individual that we have talked about today. Thank you, guys, if you're still here. Yeah, pretty gruesome. I didn't even realise how gruesome till I was somewhat in. So, yeah. As I said earlier, I'm working on my custom piece. It's for a very dear friend of mine. I've known her for years and years. Never met. She lives in America, so I'm hoping to finish this piece and get that sent off to her. It's a memorial piece. I'm waiting on completing it and showing it to her and ask her permission to publish it on my YouTube channel, because it's her story. It's not for me to just say I bought this because and tell the story. It's for her to be okay with that. So I'm pretty sure she will be, but out of respect, once that I've had that discussion with her, I will then publish it onto my channel and give you the unboxing and the reason why I'm doing this piece. But there you go. Thank you so much for joining me today. I have no words regarding Albert Fish. I will let you get on with the rest of your evening. Sleep well, won't you? Sorry, my attempt at humour. But yeah, thank you so much. It does mean a great deal that you support both me and my channel, and I know a lot of us diamond painters are into true crime. Some not, and that's cool. Yeah, that's cool. Not everyone can handle it, and it does get upsetting. It does. I mean, this guy targeted children. You know, it's bound to be very, very upsetting. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for spending time with me today, and thank you if you're on replay and you made it to the end. Kudos. I appreciate it, and I shall catch you next Thursday on my premiere. Please don't forget, I am live at 8 p.m. UK time on Mondays. Please do join me for those. I never know where they're going to go. I don't have a planned schedule as such. The first hour is spent doing the giveaways for my Fanatic family members, and Fanatic giveaway, which is my Facebook group, Diamond Painting Fanatics. Yeah, if you're not a member there, join in. We also have Up to Snow Good coming. Yeah, how loaded with prizes is Up to Snow Good this year. I have no idea how I'm ever going to top it, but we have sponsors from Etsy stores all the way through to Diamond Art Club, Spell Queen, Prism Diamond Painting, DIY Moon Shop, and so many more. Up to Snow Good, if you do not know, is my Christmas and winter themed diamond paint along that starts November the 1st all the way through to January 31st. And yeah, if you join my Fanatic Facebook group, all the details are in there on how to sign up for that. But thank you for the amazing support. We are almost at 100 entries already. It's amazing. Thank you for your support. If you would like to sponsor, I have been asked about this. If you would like to sponsor or put prizes into the prize pot, because not only are there vouchers, there are goodies up for grabs. Cover minders, pens, and goodies. And people that don't have stores or big companies behind them can donate. I do have an Amazon wish list for Snow Good. Price ranges vary from pennies all the way up to hundreds, and yeah, you can pick something. If you mark it as a gift, you get to put your name on there, so I can give proper credit to the donor. So thank you. I will link that down below if you want to check that out, and offer prizes into the prize pot as well. So yeah, I do that purely because I've been asked. So thank you. Please do enjoy the rest of your evening. Go and watch something light-hearted before going to bed. And if you're on replay, I appreciate you. And yeah, fill your day with light-hearted stuff for the rest of the day. And I shall see you on my Monday Night Live, or back here for another true crime on Thursday, or a video in between, who knows. Look after yourselves, and as always, stay safe out there. Bye guys. Bye.